My wife got a new position in a good company. I think you understand what this can lead to. I also thought so, but I tried my best to trust my wife and hoped that everything would be fine. How naive I was. My life went downhill. My name is Mike Wilson, and before that night, I believed my life was on a good path. Little did I realize it was on the brink of chaos. In the span of one evening, everything dear to me would be either lost or endangered. Despite the turmoil, I survived, finding solace in a particular Bible verse over the years. The race is not to the swift or the battle to the strong, nor does food come to the wise or wealth to the brilliant or favor to the learned. But time and chance happen to them all. I married Jenny Smith shortly after college, and we enjoyed over 7 happy years together before Jenny betrayed me completely. I've revisited every moment of our marriage, searching for signs that could have forewarned me of the impending disaster. I was utterly blindsided. Jenny and I first met in college. Standing at 5'6" with auburn hair and captivating emerald green eyes, Jenny was strikingly beautiful, a 9 or even a 9.5 on any scale. Her charm was irresistible. She had me hooked from the start. We clicked effortlessly, sharing seemingly identical ambitions, or so I thought from Jenny's conversations with me. We dated and eventually tied the knot. While Jenny was a charismatic 9 or 9.5, I considered myself an 8 or 8.5, more the strong, silent type. At 6 feet tall and around 190 pounds with sandy brown hair, I never stood out like a sports or movie star, though I occasionally caught a second glance from single women. I won't dwell on the details of how Jenny and I came together, except to say it happened during a statistics class in our junior year. Over the next year and a half, we grew inseparable. Just before graduation, I landed a promising job, setting the stage for a bright future ahead. One thing that should have raised concerns for me was Jenny's reluctance to introduce me to her parents, John and Alma. Only after we got married did I realize that Jenny was deeply embarrassed by them. In fact, I might never have met them if I hadn't insisted on speaking with her father before proposing. For a brief moment, it seemed like we might break up. However, Jenny eventually agreed, and we made plans to visit her parents at their home. During that visit, I discovered that Jenny had grown up in poverty, which she found humiliating. Despite this, I found John and Alma to be wonderful people. To me, Jenny had nothing to be ashamed of. Her parents were warm, compassionate, and incredibly friendly. Despite their modest means, a small older house in a less desirable neighborhood, just over 1,000 square feet with a simple layout of 3 bedrooms and 1 bathroom, they were always generous and welcoming. Having lost my own parents at a young age, my father when I was 14 and my mother when I was 20, I grew to love John and Alma Smith as if they were my own parents. Alma took meticulous care of the inside of the house, keeping it immaculate, while John ensured the exterior was well maintained with a neatly trimmed lawn despite their limited resources. Over time, it saddened me to witness Jenny distancing herself from her parents. Whenever I broached the topic, it inevitably led to arguments. Consequently, I refrained from mentioning John and Alma directly, but kept informed about their well-being. I made sure to call them weekly, occasionally managing to coax Jenny into speaking with them. Beyond maintaining contact, I also listened for any needs they might have. For instance, I learned John's lawnmower had broken, and he couldn't afford repairs. So I purchased a used mower, pretending it was new, and asking if he knew someone who could use my old one. I believe he understood my gesture but accepted the mower graciously. With a stable, well-paying job, I was happy to assist when necessary. I began my career as a staff accountant at a mid-sized manufacturing firm with operations spanning 5 states and 2 foreign countries. Based at the company's headquarters, our accounting team, which numbered just 18, handled all financial matters for the entire organization. Despite my junior position, I earned a substantial salary. However, my career took a significant leap 3 years later due to 2 key events: the retirement of our department manager, John Stanton, and my successful completion of the CPA exam. Initially, they attempted to recruit an external manager to replace John, but after the second candidate failed, I was offered the position. I was promoted to accounting supervisor, and my salary increased to just over $100,000. Jenny was thrilled because it meant we could afford a larger house and more expensive cars. Jenny became pregnant shortly after we married, and we had twins, a girl and a boy. Initially, Jenny wasn't happy about the pregnancy. She complained that it was too soon. She wanted to travel and enjoy life first. I, however, was overjoyed. Fortunately, once our twins, Glenda and Mark, were born, Jenny became an exceptional mother. For the first 5.5 years, she stayed at home with them. However, when the kids started kindergarten, Jenny insisted on finding a job. With her degree in English, the best job she could find was as an administrative assistant at a law firm. When I found out where Jenny would be working, I worried that she might be tempted. I had heard stories about married women working in law firms who started affairs with attorneys, but that never happened. The attorney Jenny worked for was Clem Flint, one of the firm's original partners. He was 55 years old, had a belly, and adored his wife and 5 children. Mr. Flint and his partners were devout Christians and had no tolerance for inappropriate behavior. Our marriage seemed solid, and we were intimately active, engaging in intimacy 3 or 4 times a week. However, in the 6th year of our marriage, I noticed that Jenny was behaving differently. One day, after she attacked Glenda for a trivial matter, I gently contradicted her. "What's going on, Jenny?" I asked quietly. "You didn't need to react like that. It was just a dish." Jenny burst into tears. "It's not about the dish. I'm feeling overwhelmed because I feel like life is passing me by. I haven't had the chance to really live. I'm just seen as someone's wife or mom. There are so many places I want to visit that I may never see. There are so many things we can't afford. My life feels like crap." I was taken aback by Jenny's perspective on our life together. I thought she might be going through a midlife crisis and suggested we see a counselor. She reacted angrily to the suggestion. "I'm not crazy. I just want a better life." With that, Jenny stormed off. The children and I would tiptoe around for weeks on end. It had its upsides. Jenny would occasionally bounce back, and we'd enjoy being a loving family for a while. But then the discontented Jenny would resurface. I believed it was just a rough patch, confident that Jenny would eventually recover permanently. Even if she didn't, I had committed to her for better or worse. I loved Jenny deeply, and I was sure she loved me too. Besides, we had our 2 wonderful children, and I knew Jenny adored them. They were amazing kids, and I made every effort to spend time with them, especially during Jenny's mood swings. I sympathized with the kids because they didn't understand why Mommy was sometimes sad and unkind. So I worked hard to shield them from it, always reassuring them that no matter how she behaved, their mother loved them dearly. Many weekends, I organized outings around town with Mark and Glenda. Sometimes Jenny would join us, but often she didn't. The kids loved it when their cheerful mom came along, but they were relieved when we left the unhappy mommy at home. Our household tension eased after the annual 4th of July picnic hosted by my company. It was a joyful event for everyone, and surprisingly, Jenny eagerly anticipated it. Following that particular picnic, life at home improved significantly. Jenny's spirits lifted remarkably, and our intimacy flourished. I couldn't have been more content. However, everything changed at the company's New Year's Eve party, plunging my life into turmoil. Normally, Jenny and I would skip the party, not being heavy drinkers and my enjoyment of dancing exceeding Jenny's. For us, New Year's Eve meant a quiet dinner with the kids, putting them to bed, watching the ball drop, and celebrating the start of the new year intimately. But this New Year's Eve was different. Jenny expressed a strong desire to attend, despite not having done so in years, citing a longing to dance again. It struck me as odd since Jenny wasn't particularly fond of dancing. Nevertheless, if it meant so much to her, I was happy to go along. Seeing her in a stunning dress raised my hopes for a memorable start to the new year. When we arrived at the party, I was taken aback to find Brad Colson, the owner of our company, there. Normally, he only showed up at the 4th of July picnic. It was actually at the last picnic that Jenny first met him. It seemed like everyone was surprised to see him at this particular party. It was generally agreed that he enjoyed the picnic because of the volleyball and softball games. He was a decent athlete, but no one dared to tell him he wasn't as good as he thought. We had a few guys who had played baseball in college or the minor leagues, and a woman who had received a full scholarship to Ohio State for volleyball. After I settled Jenny in, I went to get drinks for us. However, when I returned, the music had started, and Brad had already asked my wife to dance. They danced for 3 or 4 songs before he brought her back to our table. When I asked Jenny to dance later on, she said she just wanted to rest. But half an hour later, when Brad reappeared, she eagerly got up and danced with him for 5 consecutive songs. I managed to dance with Jenny twice before she said she was tired. Around 15 minutes before midnight, Brad approached again. Jenny didn't even look at me as she took his hand. Needless to say, I was extremely upset, but I didn't want to make a scene in front of my boss. I planned to confront Jenny about it later when we got home. I sat there seething after someone mentioned it was almost midnight. I glanced around for my wife, hoping to start the new year with a passionate kiss from her. To my shock, I saw Brad pull Jenny close and kiss her. Anger surged through me, and I marched over to where they were. I forcefully separated Brad from my wife and shouted, "Stay away from my wife, you jerk!" The room fell silent as all eyes turned towards us. No one had ever addressed Mr. Colson like that. I didn't care that he was my boss. He had crossed a line, and I wasn't going to tolerate it. I didn't fear being fired. My heart raced, and I could feel my face burning red. I wasn't one for confrontation, but I was prepared to stand up to Brad if needed. He just smirked at me. "Jenny, it's time to leave," I said through clenched teeth. I reached for Jenny's hand, but she pulled away. "Mike, I'm sorry," Jenny said, taking Brad's hand. "I'm going with Brad. Just for tonight. We'll talk tomorrow." I was so stunned I couldn't respond. Before I knew it, Brad and Jenny had left, leaving everyone staring at me. It was the most humiliating moment of my life. I left immediately and went home. The day after New Year's Day. When I woke up on the morning after New Year's Day, I was suffering from the worst hangover of my life. The previous night had involved too much crying and drinking and not enough sleep. I had vented my frustrations to anyone who would listen. I had planned and schemed ways to get back at Brad Colson, convinced that he had manipulated my wife into leaving with him. I had already rehearsed in my mind what I would say to my wife when she returned. I was certain that we would need extensive counseling, despite feeling deeply disrespected. I still wanted Jenny back. I loved her that much. However, as I brainstormed ways to exact revenge on Brad, all my ideas were alarmingly violent. Each plan was quickly dismissed. I couldn't risk going to jail over someone like Brad Colson. It took 3 hours, but I finally managed to alleviate my pounding headache to some extent. I called the babysitter and arranged to pick up Mark and Glenda in a couple of hours. Reality began to dawn on me, and paranoia set in. What if Jenny decided not to return? Suddenly, this seemed like a real possibility. What if she took the kids first? I panicked and hurriedly got dressed, racing to collect my children before Jenny could think of it. I wanted to approach any conversation with Jenny from a position of strength. The kids were overjoyed to see me, but immediately asked where Mommy was. It took every ounce of strength I had not to break down in front of them. After taking a deep breath, I lied and told them Mommy had gone on a trip. They looked disappointed until I suggested we go to IHOP for pancakes. While the children were eating, I began 2 lists, one detailing how we could move forward from this situation, and the other outlining plans for separation. Upon returning home, I felt a mix of relief and disappointment finding Jenny absent. I desired reconciliation with my wife, yet feared my own actions and words. Then I noticed the blinking light on the answering machine. Jenny's message suggested postponing our discussion for a week due to the intensity of my emotions. She mentioned filling in for Brad as his secretary on a business trip, which I found hard to believe. I crumpled the reconciliation list and discarded it. The emotional anguish I experienced then surpassed any physical pain I had ever known. It's a feeling that can only be understood by someone betrayed by the person they loved and trusted most. During those days, I glimpsed how a man could lose control, causing harm to loved ones or their possessions, and even contemplate ending their own life. These thoughts relentlessly circled my mind. Fortunately, I was able to put aside the thought of ending my life, because my love for my children prevented such a selfish act. However, the darker thoughts persisted, including unsettling questions about Mark and Glenda's paternity. I agreed without hesitation when the children asked to play in the backyard. I welcomed this time alone to gather myself and begin plotting a new course for my life. While the kids enjoyed themselves outside, I started drafting a comprehensive to-do list aimed at safeguarding myself and my children in the impending storm. At the top of my agenda was arranging for a DNA test, which I planned to pick up while we were out for a meal. I tried to cover every conceivable angle, aware that I might have overlooked important details. My first call was to a friend who had been through a divorce, seeking his recommendation for a lawyer. He emphatically dismissed his own lawyer, but suggested his ex-wife's instead. I asked for the lawyer's contact details, and after a brief search, he provided me with the information. The lawyer's name was Tom Watson, and he worked in a firm with 3 other attorneys specializing in divorces, wills, and estates. Despite it being New Year's Day, I decided to call the number, anticipating I could leave a message and receive a callback on Tuesday. Much to my surprise, a man answered the phone with the words, "Tom Watson." I quickly realized that I'd found the attorney I wanted to hire. Before he could brush me off, I outlined my issue. Initially, he seemed inclined to schedule an appointment for me, but his interest peaked significantly when I mentioned that my wife's lover was Brad Coulson. He immediately asked if I could meet him at his office at 9 a.m. on Tuesday. I explained I could if I found someone to look after my kids. He then suggested I bring my children along, as they might be useful in deciding the course of action. Before the meeting, he instructed me to gather all my financial documents: bank statements, credit card bills, utility bills, mortgage payments, and any expenses over $100. Additionally, he requested birth certificates, our marriage license, social security numbers, tax returns for the years we were married, and any other pertinent records. After gathering everything I thought might be useful, including a copy of the phone message Jenny had left me, I spent the rest of the day playing with the kids. That evening, on our way to Pizza Joe's, I stopped to pick up the DNA test kit. After swabbing my kids' cheeks and mine, I took the kit to a Federal Express office. The DNA testing company promised results in 2 days. I felt immense relief when the tests confirmed that the kids were indeed mine. The next morning was a bit chaotic as I got the kids fed and ready. Before heading out for my appointment, I called work to inform them I'd be taking the rest of the week as vacation. Tom Watson's office turned out to be larger than I had expected. After introductions, Tom led us into a spacious conference room. I took Mark and Glenda to one end and let them entertain themselves with their mini iPads. Tom and I sat at the conference table at the opposite end. I broke down twice while recounting how my wife had left me for my boss on New Year's Eve. It was still hard to fathom how she could have discarded me like yesterday's news. Tom was incredibly empathetic and understanding. He reassured me that things would improve, but I was in such a dark place that I found it hard to believe. After detailing my concerns, Tom slid a photograph across the table towards me. "Before you decide to hire me, I want you to understand something," he began. "This is a picture of my cousin, Abby Coulson. She was married to Joe Coulson, Brad Coulson's brother. Joe betrayed Abby and left her for someone else. I represented Abby during the divorce, but Brad paid for an aggressive legal team that overwhelmed me with paperwork. At that time, fresh out of law school, I was still naive about how ruthless some could be. Although Abby didn't get the outcome she deserved, I managed to partially overturn the judgment after 5 years of hard work. Since then, I've dedicated myself to becoming the best family attorney I can be. Even though I couldn't completely right the wrong done to Abby, my partial victory angered Brad. I'm willing to face him again in court, but I want you to know that he'll unleash his lawyers on us, especially because I'm representing you. Nevertheless, I promise to give this case everything I've got. I'm satisfied with that, I asserted firmly. Let's begin. It was suddenly reassuring to have someone in my corner and to finally push back. Over the next 3 hours, we sifted through all the documents I'd brought, deliberated over what I could anticipate, and eventually delved into what I truly desired from this ordeal. Of course, I wish none of this had happened in the first place. But since that's not possible, I want to keep the house, secure half of our assets, maintain my retirement savings, avoid paying alimony, and skip child support. Your expectations might need some adjustment, Tom replied solemnly, but I'll strive to secure all of that for you. Are you aiming for full custody? I shook my head, then clarified. If Jenny isn't interested in the kids, then I definitely want them. But I know she loves them and will likely fight for full custody. I think joint custody would be fair. Well, let me be frank, Tom said, with a frown. You should prepare yourself for the likelihood that she'll probably get primary custody. With Mr. Coulson's wealth and the likelihood that he plans to marry your wife after the divorce, she might end up as a stay-at-home mom. Unless you plan to remarry and can prove that your wife intends to be a stay-at-home mom, the best outcome you can hope for is generous visitation rights. But considering what a difficult person Coulson is, they might contest even that. This is really unfair, I muttered bitterly. I didn't do anything wrong. Yet I'm the one who's going to lose out. In terms of your children, that's a realistic assessment. However, on the bright side, if your wife marries Brad, you won't have to pay alimony. On the downside, you would still likely be responsible for child support. I'll happily pay child support as long as I can be involved in my kids' lives. After the main part of the meeting, Tom spoke privately with Mark and Glenda while I waited outside. I'm unsure of the specifics of their conversation, but when Tom emerged with the children, he appeared satisfied. You must be quite the father, Tom remarked as he took me aside. Your kids really adore you. Unfortunately, it seems they also hold their mother dear, though not quite as much as you. Leaving Tom Watson's office, I felt relieved about my financial situation, but deeply concerned about the time I would get to spend with my children. Tom assured me he would prepare the divorce papers and a request for temporary custody of the kids. We planned to serve my wife shortly after her return from her business trip. 8 days after D-Day, Jenny called that morning and asked if we could talk. I agreed and arranged for the kids to be elsewhere. It seemed to unfold exactly as Tom had predicted. I had no more illusions about Jenny wanting to reconcile. Despite the pain it caused me, there was no way to undo what had happened. Our marriage was over and Jenny was moving on to someone else. I wasn't surprised when she arrived at the door. Tom had prepared me for something like this. Still, I made her wait and ring the bell 2 more times. When I finally opened the door, I struggled to keep my emotions in check. Without saying a word, I turned and went back to the kitchen to grab a beer. When I sat down, Jenny asked about the kids, and I was on the edge of losing my temper. Instead, I responded calmly, "So now you're interested in them?" I suppose I had that coming, she hurriedly tried to soothe me. But I genuinely believed it would have been chaotic and unsafe for us to meet after how I left you on New Year's Eve. I apologize for that. Originally, I hadn't planned to leave you that night. I intended to tell you on New Year's Day, but Brad didn't want to wait any longer. Also, the trip came up because Brad had an issue at one of his plants. He convinced me it would be better to give you some space, and he was right. I was uncertain initially, but after that trip, I realized he's my soulmate. Isn't it incredible that your soulmate happens to be extremely wealthy? I said sarcastically. I assume you're here to discuss our divorce. So let's get to it, so you can stop wasting my time. I have more important things to do than talk to you. I need to use the restroom." Jenny's eyes flashed with anger. "There's no need to be crude and insulting. I couldn't care less what you think." Jenny was now visibly upset. She wasn't accustomed to being spoken to the way I had. "I don't have to sit here and be insulted." "Then leave," I said, getting up and heading for the backyard. Truthfully, I didn't really want Jenny to leave. But given my current state of mind, maybe it was for the best. Apparently, my attitude had unsettled her and she lost her bravado. "No, I think we need to have this conversation," she said firmly, reaching into her purse and pulling out an envelope, which she pushed across the table. I opened it and started reading. Once again, Tom had been right. The terms Jenny proposed were quite generous until I reached the last paragraph. At that moment, I nearly leaped across the table to throttle Jenny. I threw the papers back at her. "Tell Brad Coulson he can take his proposal and shove it. I'll never agree to him adopting my children. Offering me $100,000 to go along with it is just plain disgusting. Mike, Brad, and I can give the kids a much better life than you can. To hell with it, Jenny." "Mike, this is what's best for the kids," she continued, brushing off my insults. "I'll be a stay-at-home mom, they'll go to top schools, live in a nicer house, travel. Things you can't provide. But to sweeten the deal, Brad's offering you $250,000 to agree to the adoption. Jenny, not only are you promiscuous, but you're also unintelligent. What part of rejecting both you and your partner do you fail to comprehend?" "I'm sure Brad would increase his offer to $500,000, Jenny responded hastily. "That's probably more money than you'll ever see at once in your life. We struggled to make ends meet on just your salary, and remember, Brad is your employer. Your job could vanish in an instant." "Even if he offered $100 million, I wouldn't accept." I restrained myself from acting impulsively. I was tempted to throw Jenny out, but that would disrupt Tom's carefully laid plan. Glancing at my watch, I refocused on Jenny. "I've had time to reflect on our marriage, and it's not a pretty picture. You might think you hold some special allure, but you don't. We had a decent marriage once, but this past year you've been a terrible wife, a neglectful mother, and just a generally awful person. We were more than financially stable until you started overspending on unnecessary luxuries. I don't need Brad's leftovers, and if Brad is thinking of firing me, I'll take it up with the EEOC. Right now the court has granted me custody of the kids due to your abandonment." "I didn't abandon our kids," she snapped back, just as the doorbell rang. "That must be for you," I said calmly, heading to answer it with a smile. I opened the door to find a deputy sheriff waiting. I moved aside, revealing Jenny standing a bit behind me. He nodded, asking, "Are you Jenny Wilson?" After she showed her driver's license, he handed me an envelope and informed her she had been served. I smirked as she read the divorce papers, then she left in tears. It felt incredibly satisfying. "She's gone now and she's been served," I informed Tom over the phone. "Did you behave yourself?" Tom inquired. "It was tough, but I managed to stay composed. However, Jenny left in tears after being served," I confessed. "I'm not sure what that was about. Your predictions about their offers were pretty accurate, though they did add one twist that nearly got to me. Apparently Brad Coulson wants to adopt my kids. Can he even do that?" "That's a complication I didn't foresee," Tom admitted. "Removing your parental rights would be incredibly difficult unless they prove you're unfit. So, be cautious around your wife and Brad. Stick with witnesses whenever possible. I wouldn't put it past Brad to manipulate things and have people lie. You're a good dad, but be aware they might twist innocent events against you. Now that we know their strategy, we'll prepare." "Tom, does it ever get easier?" I asked, overwhelmed once more by Jenny's departure. "It does," Tom replied assuredly. "And if you're honest, you'll see you're not as devastated as the night your wife left. There will be ups and downs for a while. We may lose some battles with Brad and Jenny, but each setback will teach us how to fight smarter. As they said in the 60s, keep the faith, baby. During my week off from work, I followed all of Tom's financial advice diligently. I opened new accounts and transferred half of everything into them as he suggested. I also arranged for the twins to attend after-school care at their school, which ran until 5:30, a perfect fit with my work hours from 7 a.m. to 3:30 p.m. This schedule allowed me enough time to handle chores and pick up the kids promptly. During that week, I also worked out a new routine with the kids. Jenny had been fairly relaxed about bedtime, but I realized I needed a more structured approach. I ensured they were bathed, teeth brushed, and in bed by 8 p.m. Initially, they resisted, but when I promised to read 2 stories instead of 1, they eagerly looked forward to bedtime. Spending time with my kids during this period was crucial for me. Our bond grew stronger, and surprisingly, they didn't ask about their mother very often. However, one day Mark did inquire if his mom would ever come back. I didn't want to deceive them, so I told them the truth, that their mother had found someone new she wanted to be with, and she wanted him to be their new father. This revelation made both kids cry, and I immediately regretted my candor. I reassured them that no matter what happened, I would always be their father. This comforted them, and they hugged me tightly, grateful for the reassurance. On Saturday morning, it was time to bring the kids to their horse riding lessons. Despite their mom being away for over a week, Mark and Glenda were excited because they were going to Miss Darla's place. The idea for riding lessons had been mine, which Jenny initially opposed. Like many young girls, Glenda adored horses and was eager to learn riding, while Mark tagged along so as not to miss out. Surprisingly, Mark progressed quickly and soon outshone his sister as a rider. Darla Lampson owned a horse farm where she also taught riding. She was an exceptional instructor, adored by the kids. Darla had a pleasant face, albeit carrying a few extra pounds, but her warm smile and contagious laughter won everyone over. I took a liking to her right from our first meeting. Jenny teased me, saying I liked Darla because she laughed at all my cheesy jokes, and maybe she was right. Nonetheless, Darla was just easy to like. "Where's Mrs. Wilson?" Darla inquired while I stood beside the corral fence. "Mrs. Wilson and I are divorcing," I stated plainly. "I'm sorry to hear that," Darla responded quickly. "I didn't mean to pry." "No, it's okay," I reassured her. "It's just how things are. I'm hoping we can still keep the kids in these riding lessons. Right now, they're with me. But my lawyer says she'll likely get primary custody with me getting visitation rights. I'm fighting for joint custody, but it's not looking promising." "Why is that?" "Well, after the divorce, Jenny will marry her wealthy lover. She'll stay home with the kids while I'll have to hire babysitters. And to top it off, I work for that backstabbing Brad. So on top of everything else, I'll probably lose my job when he starts tightening the screws on me." "Brad Coulson, by any chance?" Darla asked, her eyes narrowing. "Yeah. Do you know him?" "I haven't met him in person, but I've unfortunately dealt with his lawyers. His property borders my ranch, and he wanted to annex 2 acres of my land without compensation. His aim was simply to increase the buffer between his land and mine, planting numerous trees and bushes without my consent. Honestly, if he had asked, I might have agreed. But Mr. Coulson doesn't believe in asking. He prefers taking what he wants. His lawyers kept filing motions, and I couldn't afford the legal battle. Besides, the land was mostly marsh and unused. After 5 months, I realized it was futile to fight for land I didn't use, so I agreed to quit claim the 2 acres if he covered my legal fees. In the end, my property taxes decreased slightly, but dealing with Brad Coulson left a bitter taste. I hope to witness his downfall. Yeah, I agree, Brad's a real jerk. Unfortunately, my soon-to-be ex-wife has chosen him. I hope she realizes her mistake soon. "What will you do if Coulson fires you?" Darla asked. "I've already started a new career path. I'm a CPA, currently working as Coulson's accountant. I've always done tax and accounting work on the side for extra income. Recently, I've expanded that into servicing 3 small businesses. It's not enough to live on yet, but I'm saving every penny from my regular job and side business to prepare for the worst. Right now I'm working from home, but once the divorce is settled, I'll likely have to sell my house and find an apartment, which won't be ideal for running a business." "Well," Darla murmured, "if you can handle my accounting work for the same fee I'm paying now, I'd be glad to give you my business." "I couldn't possibly accept that," I objected. "If your current accountant is doing a good job, there's no reason to switch." "I wouldn't even know if they're doing a good job," Darla chuckled softly. "They've been handling the ranch's accounts since my dad passed away and left it to me. It's one of the larger firms in town, Minter, Smith, and Zeller. They manage my payroll, quarterly and year-end taxes for $2,000 a month, and around $5,500 for federal taxes. I don't have any personal connection there, and the one time I called with a question, it took weeks for them to get back to me." I glanced over at Glenda and Mark, who were joyfully leaping their horses over a small rail with an instructor alongside. Returning my attention to Darla, I said, "All right, if you're sure, I'll take a quick look at your books right now. If I can handle everything for the same cost, I'll add you to my extensive client roster." Darla chuckled and ushered me into her office. She laid out this year's manual accounting books and last year's federal tax return. It didn't take me long to realize that Minter, Smith, and Zeller were massively overcharging her. "I can't match their price," I informed Darla with a grin. "I couldn't justify charging you more than $750 per month and $2,000 for the federal taxes." "No," Darla objected. "I'm willing to pay you the same." "No, that's not how I do business. In my view, your current accountants are taking advantage of you. Perhaps you're too small for them to bother with, but I'll only take you on if I can charge a fair rate." "Wow, I didn't expect this," Darla said gratefully. "This will really make a difference. Ever since I took over the ranch 3 years ago, it's been tough. Saving $1,250 a month will really help. Thank you. And just so you know, Glenda and Mark's lessons will be free from now on." "I can't let you do that," I objected weakly. "You didn't ask," Darla replied with a smile. "I'm telling you." Securing Darla's ranch as a client provided significant assistance, but the divorce proceedings were just beginning to intensify. The road ahead promised to be arduous and acrimonious. Despite Tom's assurances that things would improve, they hadn't. Every week seemed to bring a new photo of Brad and Jenny in the society pages, which felt unjust as Jenny's life appeared perfect, while mine felt like it was falling apart. Adding to my frustration was the inability to find a way to retaliate against either of them. I felt lonely and utterly miserable. Between 2 to 8 weeks post-DD Day, my day started off well with news that Harvey's Hardware wanted me to handle their accounting. However, things quickly took a downturn. Upon arriving at work, I was informed of my termination. While not entirely surprising, a part of me felt a strange sense of relief. Ever since the awkward incident at the New Year's Eve party, things had been tense. Though no one confronted me directly, conversations abruptly ceased whenever I entered a room. Losing my job was disheartening. It seemed Brad still held all the cards. Tom had already prepared paperwork to file a wrongful termination lawsuit with the EEOC. He warned me it would be a long, tough battle that could drag on for years. Nevertheless, Tom issued a press release about my conflict with Brad, which reportedly infuriated my former boss to no end. The situation worsened when Tom called me later that day to inform me that the judge had signed an order granting Jenny joint custody, effective immediately. I was devastated initially, but Tom reassured me that there was a silver lining. Although Jenny could live in the house with the kids, she opted not to. Instead, she arranged to pick them up after school, leaving me to collect them each evening. This arrangement became a daily ordeal for me, having to witness Jenny and Brad together, seeing her display affection towards him in front of me. It left me feeling utterly depressed, and it was confusing for the kids too. Just when I thought things couldn't get worse, Jenny's lawyers started filing motions to move the children's primary residence to Brad's house. They claimed I was denying Jenny visitation rights and attempting to alienate the children from her. Upon hearing this, Tom promptly filed a complaint, stating that I had never denied Jenny visitation, and suggested the judge speak directly with the children, who often asked their mother when she would visit them. Fortunately, the judge decided to keep the children where they were for the time being. However, he did not address the accusations against me, which concerned Tom, because he felt the judge wasn't fully attentive to our case. Tom acknowledged the judge's heavy workload, managing dozens of cases simultaneously. Then the judge revised his ruling, stipulating that each of us would have custody of the children for 2-week periods, with them moving between our homes. Initially, I worried about the inconvenience for Jenny, since the kids' school was 35 minutes away from Brad's house. Little did I realize how cunning Jenny and Brad could be, a truth I was about to discover. My suspicions began at the New Year's Eve party when Jenny left with Brad, revealing a side of her I never knew. It dawned on me then that perhaps even she didn't fully know herself. It's hard to accept when you love someone so deeply. Yet when Jenny came to pick up Glenda and Mark for the first time, her words chilled me. Jenny seemed tense, but resolute. Once the kids were in the car and out of earshot, she turned to me. "Please, let's not make this divorce harder than it needs to be. I still care about you and don't want Brad to destroy you. If you agree to let Brad adopt the kids, I'll ensure you maintain full visitation rights. But understand, I won't allow you to ruin my relationship with Brad." "Wow," I shook my head. "I thought you were just unfaithful. But I was mistaken. You're also deceitful. You can forget about me having visitation rights. Go to hell." I turned and walked back towards the house. Over my shoulder, I heard her ominous words. "You've been warned." After Jenny left, I immediately called Tom and relayed her message. Tom wasn't surprised. "I warned you to brace yourself for the worst from Brad. Have you installed cameras in your house yet?" "The exterior cameras will be installed tomorrow. Right now I've got one in my bedroom, one in the kids' room, and another in the hallway to the bathroom. I've also had cameras put in the family room and kitchen. Tomorrow they'll set up cameras for the front and backyard." "That's the best we can do for now," Tom said, sounding satisfied. "Just remember, Brad's lawyers will likely start claiming mistreatment by you. The cameras should refute any such accusations." The days Jenny spent with Mark and Glenda were tough. Brad lived a very public life. He and Jenny often appeared in the society pages or on TV, sometimes with the kids at afternoon events. In every photo, Jenny looked radiant, and the kids appeared delighted and content wherever they were. Each picture seemed to chip away at my spirit a little more. I couldn't compete with Brad's wealth. It felt like he was gradually taking my children away from me. In the 8th week, following Jenny's departure on Monday, things started to go downhill. At around 9 in the morning, I received a call from the kids' school notifying me that Mark and Glenda were absent. I immediately phoned Jenny. "Are the kids sick?" I asked, deeply concerned. "No, why would you think that?" Jenny replied smugly. "The school called and said they weren't there." "Oh, that," Jenny said dismissively. "I've enrolled them in Chesterton Elementary. It's a much better school and it's closer to my place, just 5 minutes away." "You can't just do that," I said angrily. "I can, and I did," she snapped before hanging up. Calling Tom in a panic didn't help. He explained that we could contest the change, but the judge might approve it since the new school had a higher rating. I was quickly realizing that the courts prioritized what they deemed best for the children, even if it sent a terrible message to them. In this instance, it signaled that their mother had the power to make decisions without opposition from their father. As my depression deepened, Tom warned me that things would get worse. He advised me to stay vigilant because he believed Brad and Jenny were just getting started. His prediction proved correct, and I was grateful Tom had insisted on installing security cameras and sending footage to both the security company and the cloud. Tom lodged a complaint about the school change on Tuesday, with a hearing set 3 weeks later. However, on Wednesday of the same week, Jenny's lawyers accused me of molesting our daughter. I was furious, and only Tom's calming influence prevented me from confronting Brad and Jenny physically. There were developments, and I thought one of them turned out well for me. An emergency hearing was promptly arranged, during which I was barred from seeing my children until an investigation was completed. Even supervised visits were denied due to the potential for prosecution. Tom swiftly obtained a court order to compel Jenny to specify the details of the accusation, when and where it allegedly happened, and what exactly transpired. Initially, Jenny's lawyers objected, arguing it would harm the children, but the judge saw through their tactics, having encountered similar strategies before. "Allow me to be very clear, Mr. Silas." The judge's gaze bore into Jenny's lawyer. "I take these accusations extremely seriously. If they are proven true, Mr. Wilson will face the full force of the law and will not see his children until they reach 18. However, if I discover your client is attempting to deceive me, Mrs. Wilson will face consequences. I expect you to provide Mr. Watson with a thorough account of the when, where, and nature of the alleged misconduct. Do you understand, Mr. Silas?" Jenny's lawyer visibly paled and nodded. I noticed Jenny's smile had disappeared. The next day, Mr. Silas sent a list of dates, times, and locations of the alleged incidents, but without descriptions of the alleged misconduct. I was furious that they were still playing games and trying to ruin my life. Tom reassured me we had enough evidence to completely discredit their claims. The list included 6 instances, all in the evenings, focusing on the bathroom and the children's bedroom. Tom immediately had the security footage reviewed, specifically during bath time and bedtime. The hallway camera clearly showed the twins taking turns for their baths each night, with me handing them towels afterward. In the bedroom, it was evident I laid out their pajamas and they dressed themselves. I read them 2 stories, hugged them good night, and kissed their foreheads. There was absolutely nothing inappropriate. The emergency hearing began with the judge passionately condemning all those who were involved in negative actions against the child. "All right, Mr. Silas, you've brought forth this serious accusation. What evidence do you have?" "The children disclosed it to their mother," the attorney replied. "Given the gravity of the situation, we took immediate steps to ensure their safety." "Mr. Watson," the judge turned to Tom, "what is your client's response to these allegations?" "Your Honor, both my client and I vehemently deny these allegations, and once we prove their falsity, we will request sanctions against Mrs. Watson. With your permission, I'd like to present a series of videos provided by Able Security. At my recommendation, Mr. Wilson installed cameras inside and outside his home due to concerns over baseless accusations." Mr. Silas objected immediately. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular and raises questions about authenticity. How can we be sure these videos haven't been manipulated?" The judge sighed in frustration. "Mr. Silas, clearly you're not familiar with the security system installed by Mr. Wilson in his residence. The footage from Mr. Wilson's home is live-streamed to Able Security and stored on their servers for a year. Additionally, it's backed up on the cloud. Access to these videos requires authorization from 2 company officers. It's a secure system, and I trust its integrity." After completing the video review, the judge observed that nothing had occurred during the times Jenny had specified. He expressed his displeasure and summoned the children, who had been waiting in the corridor, to his chambers. Following a 20-minute conversation with the children, the judge and my kids reappeared. They were instructed to return to the corridor to wait with a babysitter Jenny had brought along. "After speaking with the children, I am inclined to dismiss this as a misunderstanding," the judge declared. Glenda admitted that she had mentioned to her mother that her father had touched them. However, upon clarification, it turned out he had hugged and kissed them in the morning, before school, after school, and before bedtime. While I believe Mrs. Wilson should have conducted a more thorough investigation, I will consider this a misunderstanding for now. But Mrs. Wilson, be warned. Any recurrence will not be taken lightly." "Your Honor," Mr. Silas stood up. "Since we're here, could you also make a decision about the school transfer?" "Yes, that would be appropriate." the judge replied thoughtfully. After reviewing both schools and consulting with the children, I concur with Mrs. Wilson that Chesterton Elementary is a superior choice. I had narrowly escaped a crisis, but had also lost a significant battle, and the defeat was even more devastating than I initially realized. "Mike, I'll be honest with you," Tom said. "The judge's decision was unfavorable. It practically guarantees that Jenny will get primary custody of Glenda and Mark. However, there were two positives from today's hearing. First, you won't be facing jail time and can still see your kids. Second, since they couldn't prove the child abuse charge, you'll at least get visitation rights." "Yeah, I get how that goes," I replied bitterly. "Jenny will find ways to mess with my visits. We'll complain, the court will warn her, and those two jerks will find new ways to screw me over. Is there anything I can do to fight back?" Tom shook his head slowly. "Unless you move into the Chesterton School District and remarry, I don't see the judge ruling differently." That Saturday, I took the kids to their horseback riding lessons. Usually, I loved watching them ride and chatting with Darla. But today, I was at my lowest. My life was a wreck. Wife gone, job lost, and now losing my kids. It was all so unfair. She cheats, and I pay the price. "Hey, Mike," Darla said, sitting down beside me. "You look really down. Things can't be that bad, can they?" I explained to Darla that after the divorce, the kids probably wouldn't come for lessons anymore. To get joint custody, I'd have to move and get remarried, which seemed impossible. "Your wife is awful," Darla remarked bluntly. "She's treated me terribly since the kids started here. I was close to telling her off, but then I saw Glenda's face." I sighed. "No offense taken. I'm right there with you." We sat quietly for a while, then Darla suddenly sat upright. "Hey, I've got an idea. My house and half of this property are in Marion County and the Chesterton School District. Why don't you move in here and we'll tell everyone we're married? That way you'll be on equal footing with your wife." I gazed at Darla for a moment, amused, but her suggestion began to intrigue me. The more I considered it, the more I saw its potential. So I asked Darla to join me at my next meeting with Tom to lay out the plan. However, Tom dismissed it immediately. "Mike, I know you're in a tough spot, but a fake marriage won't fly. You'd need a marriage certificate, and once they realize it's a sham, they might award Jenny full custody." I was disappointed, but Darla wasn't discouraged. "What if we actually got married?" "What? That's not possible," I replied firmly. "No, listen," Darla persisted. "Imagine we announce our engagement, and once your divorce is finalized, we get married at the courthouse. Meanwhile, you can move into my place. I have 3 bedrooms, so I'll take one, you can have another. There's even a den near the front entrance where you could run your accounting business. You could pay me a token rent and sell your house. What do you think?" Tom hesitated as he glanced between Darla and me. His initial reluctance gave way to cautious consideration. "On the surface, what you're proposing isn't necessarily illegal," he began. "But you'd have to follow through with a legitimate marriage ceremony. There are other factors to address, too. We'd need a detailed agreement outlining Mike's financial responsibilities towards the house. I'd insist on a prenuptial agreement specifying asset division if the marriage ends, and if a divorce occurs too soon, it could be seen as a sham marriage by Brad and Jenny. I'd recommend a minimum of 18 months. "I agree to all of that," Darla replied promptly. My mind raced with uncertainty. "I'm starting to have second thoughts. Darla, this is a huge ask." "I'm up for it if it means getting back at Brad," Darla said, smiling determinedly. Between 8 weeks and 18 months after DD Day, after completing all the paperwork Tom had prepared, Darla appeared genuinely pleased with everything. It seemed clear to me that she must have as much disdain for Brad as I do. Essentially, our agreement stipulated a minimum marriage duration of 18 months, after which either of us could file for divorce at any time. The division of assets was explicitly outlined. Each of us retained our premarital possessions and anything earned individually during our time together. I was contributing rent towards Darla's household expenses, as specified in the prenuptial agreement. The next day, Darla and I went to the county courthouse to obtain a marriage license. We both underwent blood tests and awaited the upcoming custody hearing. Tom filed for joint custody, while Jenny's lawyer pursued sole custody. While Darla and I kept our marriage plans private, Jenny and Brad made theirs public. Their wedding details and photos graced the social pages of newspapers with expectations of over 500 attendees. Unsurprisingly, I wouldn't be among them. On the day of the final hearing, I was incredibly anxious. Despite feeling more equal to Jenny and Brad now, I understood enough about the legal system to know that fairness and justice often do not influence the final decision. Jenny's lawyer, Mr. Silas, began by outlining my perceived failings. Mr. Wilson is currently unemployed and struggling financially. He no longer resides in the Chesterton School District, where Glenda and Mark Wilson now attend school. Additionally, we remain concerned about Mr. Wilson's emotional state. Objection, Tom interjected, rising to his feet. The judge silenced him with a stern look and a gesture to sit down. Mr. Silas, do you have evidence that Mr. Wilson's mental state poses a risk to the children? Not directly, Your Honor, Mr. Silas admitted. Then refrain from discussing it, the judge admonished. In conclusion, Mr. Silas continued smoothly, Jenny Wilson and Brad Coulson plan to marry soon after her divorce is finalized. Mr. Coulson's residence is within the Chesterton School District, and he is financially well off. Mrs. Wilson intends to be a full-time parent. Therefore, we argue that granting sole custody to Mrs. Wilson is in the children's best interests. After Mr. Silas resumed his seat, Tom stood up. I'd like to address some incorrect information presented by Mr. Silas during this hearing. Firstly, Mr. Wilson is not facing any financial difficulties. I am submitting his financial statement to demonstrate that he is well capable of managing his bills and supporting his children. Any financial challenges he faced were due to Mr. Coulson's wrongful termination, against which we have filed a lawsuit with the EEOC. We anticipate a favorable settlement upon conclusion of the case. Additionally, Mr. Wilson has established a successful accounting firm, as evidenced by the included financial statements showing profitability and growth. Furthermore, he is currently engaged to Darla Lampson and resides in her home within the Chesterton School District. They plan to marry once his divorce is finalized. Therefore, we respectfully request primary or joint custody for Mr. Wilson. As Tom sat down, I glanced at Jenny. She appeared stunned, Brad looked visibly angry, and Mr. Silas seemed annoyed. It was the most satisfying feeling I'd had in weeks. We had clearly caught them off guard. I'd like to speak with the children before making my decision, the judge stated, signaling to the bailiff. The knot in my stomach had doubled in size and was now churning. The judge spent about 20 minutes talking to the children, and when they came out they looked bewildered and unsure. But then they spotted me and waved. I smiled and waved back, eliciting smiles from both of them. They paused to hug their mother before leaving the courtroom. Deciding custody when both parents love their children is the most difficult aspect of my job, the judge began. It is incredibly painful when I must choose one parent over the other. However, ultimately, my decision must be based on what is best for the children. The judge paused briefly, retrieving a paper from his folder. Glancing across the courtroom, I saw Jenny, Brad, and Mr. Silas smiling. My heart sank. She was going to win again. As I mentioned earlier, my priority is the well-being of the children, the judge reiterated. In this instance, I considered that both parents are capable of providing for them, ensuring they attend the same school and share the same marital status. Ultimately, the decisive factor was the children's own wishes. Upon speaking with them, it became clear they desired to spend time with both parents. Therefore, I am awarding joint custody of Glenda and Mark Wilson. They will alternate 2-week periods with each parent, starting this Sunday. Mrs. Wilson, who currently has the children, will have them first. Mr. Wilson will then take over in 2 weeks' time. Given that their residences are only 5 or 10 minutes apart, this arrangement should not pose a burden to either parent. The exchange will take place no later than 2 p.m. every other Sunday. Are there any other matters to discuss? With no response, the judge declared that the divorce would be finalized within 30 days, banging his gavel. The division of property had already been settled with an equal 50-50 split, and the house, now on the market, was expected to sell quickly. After covering all expenses, Jenny and I would each receive around $6,000. While it might be insignificant to Jenny, it would provide me with some extra cash if needed. I was incredibly happy, but I wanted to act as though I had expected this outcome. In the hallway, I hugged the kids, then approached Jenny and Brad, who were arguing with Mr. Silas about the judge's decision. Mr. Silas was struggling to explain that he couldn't do anything further. "Excuse me, Jenny," I interjected with a smirk. "I hate to interrupt your rant, but I need to confirm when I can pick up the kids 2 weeks from Sunday." "This isn't over, asshole," Brad growled. "Whatever, Brad," I replied dismissively. "I just want to know the pickup time to avoid any accusations of trespassing. If you prefer, we can meet at a neutral location like McDonald's." "The judge said 2 p.m., asshole, and that's final until our lawyers overturn it," Jenny snapped. "You've really hit rock bottom, marrying Miss Piggy just for joint custody." That last comment angered me, and I retaliated. "You're hardly one to judge. You're marrying your grandfather." "You little shit," Brad shouted. "Step outside and I'll teach you a lesson." I had no intention of fighting Brad. He had 3 inches and about 30 pounds on me. But I was furious, so I continued. "Don't you need to go to your car for your cane first?" Brad lunged, but I quickly stepped back out of his reach. Jenny seemed to realize things could escalate and grabbed Brad's arm. At the same time, Mr. Silas stepped between us. "Please, Mr. Coulson," he begged. "If you attack Mr. Wilson, the court might award him full custody of the children." "Please, Brad," Jenny pleaded. Suddenly, I noticed my 2 children clutching my leg, shouting at Brad, "Don't hurt our daddy." Jenny gave me a stern look before turning to the children. "It's all right, kids. Mr. Coulson and Daddy were just playing around. How about we go get some ice cream?" As they walked away, I called out to Jenny, "I'll see you at 2 p.m. 2 weeks from Sunday." Jenny glared back at me but didn't respond. At the appointed time, I picked up the kids and we went to a movie and dinner with Miss Darla. Brad's lawyers hadn't managed to change anything. The kids were thrilled that I was living on the ranch with Miss Darla. They rode horses all the time and loved Darla's cooking. When Jenny and I were married, I did most of the cooking. Jenny struggled to boil water. 30 days after the judge's decision, Darla and I wed at the courthouse, with the kids present. Darla's best friend was her maid of honor, and Tom was my best man. After the ceremony, I gave Darla a gentle kiss on the lips. The expression on her face was one of pure happiness. A week after Darla and I got married, Jenny and Brad's wedding made headlines in the society pages. Jenny appeared to be as joyful as anyone could possibly be. However, seeing the happiness on my children's faces deeply affected me. It just didn't seem fair. But as time passed, it felt like Tom's prediction that the pain would fade was never going to come true. Though some days were less agonizing, my nights were filled with loneliness and sorrow. During the first 6 months, I even contemplated ways to seek revenge. Yet no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't devise a plan that wouldn't land me in jail. How could I harm a man worth hundreds of millions of dollars? And what could I possibly do to Jenny? Inform her parents? They were already aware, and Jenny seemed indifferent. Nonetheless, it was incredibly painful, especially seeing every picture of her in the papers looking radiant and happy. She had moved on and left me behind. In my darkest moments, I briefly considered influencing my children against their mother. But my love for them prevented me from ever acting on such thoughts. My pain remained intense. What exacerbated it further was seeing my kids content with the new arrangement. I couldn't blame them. They had the best of both worlds, regular time with both their mother and father. They couldn't stop talking about how amazing things were at Brad's place. The swimming pool, hot tub, game room, tennis court, and large-screen TVs in every room. Brad even had a mini movie studio with a popcorn maker. About 3 months after the divorce was finalized, Jenny began violating the peaceful co-parenting rules we'd established. She started subtly trying to turn Glenda and Mark against me, insinuating that I wasn't a good father because I couldn't spend as much money on them as Brad did. When the kids told me this, I felt a mix of sadness and anger. Darla was furious when she found out and insisted we sit down with the kids. During their next visit, I gathered them at the kitchen table and asked, "Do you think I'm a bad father because I can't spend as much money on you as Brad and Mommy do?" "That's what Mommy says," Mark replied uneasily. "Mark, Mr. Coulson is very wealthy. That's why your mom married him. I can't afford to buy you everything they can. Compared to Mr. Coulson, I'm not wealthy at all. All I have to offer is my love. If getting presents is what's important to you, I won't make you come to the ranch anymore." Glenda started crying. "No, Daddy. I don't want to only be with Mommy. I want to be with you, too." "Me, too," Mark added tearfully. I don't know what the kids said to Jenny later, but something set her off and she stormed over to the ranch. "Why the hell are Mark and Glenda mad at me for picking on their poor daddy?" she yelled when I opened the door. I didn't want to argue, so I just said, "Go away, Jenny," and slammed the door. That marked the beginning of a new chapter. Jenny started organizing special outings for the kids during my scheduled 2-week periods. The first outing was a trip to Disney World, and despite their insistence, I eventually agreed. Jenny continued this pattern every few months, which began to deeply upset me. It was Darla who showed me how to turn the tables on Jenny. When the kids asked to go to New York City next, I calmly suggested swapping weeks. Jenny refused, leaving the kids disappointed with her instead of me. 1 point for the good guys. That period was incredibly stressful and disheartening for me. Thankfully, I had strong support. Darla was always there to lift me up when I was feeling overwhelmed. Additionally, I found allies in John and Alma Smith. Yes, Jenny's own parents. Interestingly, Jenny didn't even invite her parents to her wedding when she married Brad, embarrassed by them and wanting to keep her day flawless. When I discovered this, I promptly invited them over for a BBQ at the ranch on the same day as the wedding. Darla insisted they stay for the weekend, and it turned out to be a wonderful time. I learned that John had served as a soldier in Vietnam, where he was wounded 3 times but survived. Despite his injuries, which included the loss of 3 fingers and facial scars, he returned home a decorated hero with 3 Purple Hearts, a Bronze Star, and a Silver Star. Learning about John's bravery and Alma's pride in him contrasted sharply with Jenny's embarrassment. It was then that my admiration for Jenny began to wane. From then on, we typically invited Jenny's parents to stay at least 1 weekend when the kids were with me. Jenny refused to host her parents at her new home or visit them at theirs, which deeply saddened me. However, Mark and Glenda got to bond with their grandparents during visits to the ranch. It was during this time that I also discovered John's background. He grew up on a cattle ranch and had been a cowboy before serving in Vietnam. John even encouraged me to learn horseback riding, which opened up a whole new way for me to connect with my kids. Over the months, I delved into books about divorce and co-parenting, finding valuable advice. One particularly helpful suggestion was to prioritize experiences over material things for children. Darla was amazing at creating memorable experiences for us all. We explored local attractions, went camping, bowling, and played miniature golf countless times. Darla even coordinated a mini rodeo with the local charity league, involving the kids in planning. Mark and Glenda were thrilled about attending their first rodeo, especially leading the parade through town. Despite Jenny's attempt to lure the kids to Disneyland in California, they adamantly refused, eager not to miss the rodeo. The event was a tremendous success and has since become an annual tradition. In the first year post-divorce, Jenny persistently sought to earn the children's affection. She frequently made subtle digs at me and occasionally persuaded them to spend extra time with her and Brad instead of me. Despite feeling hurt each time, I never let it show. Every night they stayed with me, I maintained our routine of reading 2 books before bedtime. As they grew older, we moved on to chapter books, reading a few chapters each night, a tradition I kept up until they reached 5th grade. Living with Darla, although we didn't share a bed, was remarkably pleasant. She had a sunny disposition and was enjoyable company. Operating my accounting business from her home office allowed it to thrive. By the end of the first year, I was earning around 70% of my previous salary at Brad's company. Even a year after the divorce, Jenny continued trying to surpass me in the kids' eyes. However, Brad had realized by then that I would never permit him to adopt my children. Understanding this, his interest in them waned. He remained cordial and pleasant, but viewed them as someone else's kids. Brad began monopolizing more of Jenny's time, insisting she accompany him on overseas trips. When it was her turn to have the kids, they traveled with them. Initially, I opposed letting Glenda and Mark leave the country due to fears of parental kidnapping. Jenny persisted in persuading me to let the kids go on their first overseas trip. Darla eventually convinced me that despite Brad's behavior, he wouldn't risk the scandal of kidnapping my kids. So, reluctantly, I agreed. Glenda and Mark adored the trip and couldn't stop talking about it for days. Subsequently, there were more trips abroad with the kids accompanying their mother. Once, when Brad's trip was extended, I expected Jenny to keep the kids with her. Surprisingly, she called me and arranged for them to fly home, where I picked them up at the airport. The first anniversary of my divorce passed unnoticed by me. It wasn't until Tom called one day to check in that I realized I had also missed my wedding anniversary with Darla, not even mentioning it to her. I had to admit to Tom that he was right. Most of the pain, loneliness, and anger had faded away. Occasionally there was a pang, but Jenny was mostly a distant memory now. I did feel guilty, though, about not getting anything for Darla on our anniversary. While I knew ours wasn't a real marriage, Darla had been incredibly supportive, so I bought her flowers and took her out to dinner. It didn't seem like much, but Darla glowed for days afterward. As we approached the 18-month mark, however, Darla began to seem moody. She wasn't unpleasant, but I could tell something was bothering her. I thought maybe I had overstayed my welcome, so I started looking for a new place to live. Even though custody wasn't a big issue anymore, I wasn't taking any chances. I searched tirelessly until I found a townhouse to rent. It had 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, and a 1-car garage. Most importantly, it was in the Chesterton School District. I was reluctant to leave. Living on the ranch suited me perfectly, and operating my business from the den had been ideal. Besides, I cherished Darla's company. Until recently, she had always been cheerful and positive. With some guidance from me, Darla expanded the ranch by acquiring an additional 200 acres of mostly rocky hills. The trails winding through these hills became a favorite for those seeking more than just riding in a corral. It became a popular destination for group getaways, where people could ride, sleep, and cook outdoors. Corporations particularly favored it for team-building weekends. I encouraged Darla to start summer camps for kids, which quickly gained immense popularity, requiring her to hire extra staff. She also built a dozen cabins for adults seeking an authentic horse ranch experience, a project for which I helped secure financing. What was once a modest business barely sustaining Darla's livelihood now earned her nearly $200,000 annually after taxes. Meanwhile, my own business had grown to the point where I occupied both the den and a utility room. I had a receptionist, or secretary, and an accountant on staff, and my income exceeded what I had earned working for Brad by 70%. I had completely forgotten about it, but in the end, Brad's company settled the wrongful termination lawsuit. Tom suggested I hold out for more, but I just wanted it over with. They paid me $250,000. Despite Tom being entitled to a third, I gave him half. The rest I set aside for buying a new place to live and setting up an office. The night before the 18 months were up, I shared my plans while the kids were with their mother. "Darla, I want to sincerely thank you," I began, feeling a wave of sadness. "You saved me when I thought I might lose Mark and Glenda. I know it's been a huge imposition, but it was a lifeline for me. Our agreement ends tomorrow, so I found a temporary rental until I can buy a house. Also, I hope it's okay if I continue to use the den for another month until I finalize the lease on my office space, which I aim to have sorted by next week." I wasn't sure what kind of reaction I expected, perhaps relief, but I was taken aback by what happened next. Darla burst into tears and hurried to her bedroom. I stood there, stunned and unsure of what to do. I knocked on her door, but there was no answer from Darla. That night, lying in bed, I was deeply disturbed. Despite the fact that I was married to Darla, our relationship was never close. I cared deeply about her, which I never did with Jenny. However, for fear of offending her, I kept my distance while living in her house. Apart from the occasional hug or kiss on the cheek, we lived separately. I talked to her in the morning. But around midnight, a severe thunderstorm broke out. Lightning struck very close by, shaking the house and waking me up. A few moments later, Darla slipped into my bedroom. "Mike, I'm terribly afraid of thunderstorms," she whimpered. "Can I sleep with you?" "Of course," I replied, lifting the blanket. Darla clung to me, trembling. "I'm really scared," she whispered, trembling. I held her close, comforting her. "Please, Mike," she begged. "I know you don't love me, but I need you to make love to me before you leave." At that moment, I realized that my feelings for Darla were deep. It wasn't the intense love I felt for Jenny. Instead, in 18 months, it developed into a mature friendship, growing into something deeper. Making love to Darla that night was the last piece of the puzzle that healed me. "Darla, I'm not sure that I feel love for you, but I know for sure that I never want to leave you," I confessed, trying to catch my breath. "At first, I thought of us as friends, but my feelings for you have steadily grown month after month. Lately, I've wanted more, but I was afraid you wouldn't reciprocate. I couldn't risk being rejected." "Oh, Mike, I've loved you almost from the moment we met," she replied emotionally. "But you were married to Jenny, and you were head over heels in love with her. When she left you and we came up with our plan to pretend to be married, I dared to hope. But when you said you were leaving tonight, I was shattered. I love you so much. I'll be a good wife to you. Please give us a chance." "I'll only leave if you ask me to," I assured her, kissing her gently. "Now this is my home, and you are my wife, now and forever." 18 months to a decade after D-Day. The morning after my night with Darla dawned bright and cloudless. In an instant, my perspective on my tumultuous life had shifted completely. Despite enduring a painful betrayal, I found myself in a far better place than I had ever imagined. The anguish, rage, and isolation were gone. I could now think of Jenny without the weight on my heart. My feelings toward my ex-wife had transformed from love to indifference. What was once a fraudulent marriage had blossomed into something genuine and loving. I decided Darla and I deserved a honeymoon. I asked her where she wanted to go to celebrate our newfound deep connection. I half expected her to suggest Paris or Hawaii, or perhaps even Las Vegas. But to my surprise, she didn't choose any of those. Instead, Darla wanted to go to Montana. "Why Montana?" I inquired. My dad used to tell me stories about the ranch he worked on in Montana. He absolutely loved it there, and that experience inspired him to eventually buy his own ranch when he moved to Texas. Land was much cheaper back then. I've always wanted to visit Montana because of those stories, but I didn't want to go alone, she explained. Why didn't he just buy a ranch in Montana? I wondered. Because he couldn't stand the winters, she replied. So we spent 2 weeks exploring Montana, visiting different parts of the state, and even stayed a week at a working ranch. Darla found plenty of inspiration for her future ranch. Yet the most memorable part of the trip was the nights we spent close together, discovering each other's desires. The children were excited to see us when we picked them up, but then they shared something that bothered me. Jenny and Brad had flown to Eastern Europe because Brad was opening 4 new factories across 3 different countries. During their absence, they had hired a babysitter to look after Glenda and Mark. The kids weren't happy about being with a babysitter who was 50 years old and restricted them to only going to school, doing homework, and watching a bit of TV. Moreover, since the babysitter couldn't swim, they couldn't even use the pool. When Jenny came to pick up the kids after 2 weeks, I asked her about it. "Jenny, the kids mentioned that you and Brad went to Europe and left them with a babysitter." "That's none of your business, Mike, so don't start." I raised my hands in surrender. "I'm not trying to argue. I just wanted to offer that if you ever need to travel, we'd be happy to take the kids instead of hiring a babysitter. We were away this time, so we couldn't help out. I'm just saying it's an option. The custody arrangement is clear, 2 weeks here at your place and 2 weeks at Brad and my house," Jenny replied sharply, before telling the kids to get in the car. The next day, I called Tom to inform him about my conversation with Jenny and my proposal. He suggested waiting to see if it happened again, as it might have been a one-time occurrence. 6 weeks later, it did happen again. I learned about it when I called the children. Jenny and Brad had been away on another trip for a week. It was then that Tom moved to amend the custody agreement. Upon Jenny's return from Europe, she called me angrily after seeing the notice for a custody agreement modification hearing. She vehemently expressed her refusal to agree to any changes. Tom warned me that the court might side with Jenny, but I insisted on proceeding. In court, Jenny's lawyer, Mr. Silas, seemed displeased to be there, and it struck me as odd that only Jenny was present, not Brad. "Your Honor, this hearing is a waste of time," Mr. Silas stated. "The current custody agreement has been effective for nearly 2 years, and my client sees no reason to alter it now." "Your Honor, we're simply advocating for the children's best interests," Tom countered, outlining our rationale. "We understand Mr. Coulson travels frequently and naturally wants his wife to accompany him. Our request is simply for Mrs. Coulson to allow the children to stay with their father during her absences. Should she return early, the children would go back to her residence at her convenience." "Mr. Silas, any further remarks?" the judge inquired over his glasses. "The current custody arrangement is working, and Mrs. Coulson prefers it to remain unchanged," Mr. Silas replied. The judge quickly scanned between the 2 tables. "All right, this is straightforward. While I agree with Mr. Silas that the current custody arrangement appears effective, and I understand Mrs. Coulson will be away with her husband for much of that time, it doesn't make sense to deprive the children of their father's presence when the mother is absent. Therefore, I'm granting Mr. Wilson's request to modify the custody agreement as proposed." I was taken aback by the judge's swift decision and even more surprised that he ruled in my favor. But as I saw Jenny's face cloud over with anger, I sensed a storm was brewing. "Why do you have to be so difficult?" Jenny demanded in the hallway after the hearing. "Jenny, I don't know what your issue is, but I've had enough of it. What's the big deal? You're not around, so why can't the kids stay with me? From what I hear, Glenda and Mark are having a much better time with me than with that tyrant you hired to watch them. To hell with you, Mike," she spat and stormed off. "Do you have any clue what her problem is?" I asked Tom. "I can only guess," he replied. "I think Jenny hates not being in control. And more than anything, she's afraid the kids will prefer you over her." "You're probably right," I sighed. "Jenny keeps trying to turn the kids against me, and she always keeps me waiting 10 or 15 minutes when I pick them up. But I still don't get it. Jenny has everything she wants. Why does she have to give me a hard time?" "Because she can," Tom said with a smirk. "Anyway, you owe me lunch." 2 years after our first night together as a married couple, Darla and I were overjoyed to welcome our daughter Wendy into the world. Just 18 months later, our family grew again with the arrival of our son, Stephen. Darla proved to be an exceptional mother, and Glenda became like a second mother to our children, while Mark became fiercely protective of his younger siblings. The next 5 years flew by in the blink of an eye. During that time, Mark and Glenda were with us most of the time, around 70 to 80%. Meanwhile, Jenny and Brad seemed to travel frequently across the globe. After our divorce, Jenny's contact with her parents dwindled to almost nothing. They would visit Jenny and Brad once or twice a year, usually meeting at a restaurant for dinner. John and Alma were never invited to parties at Brad's house, nor were they welcome to spend the night there. Conversely, Darla and I hosted John and Alma nearly every weekend. The kids adored having them around, and I cherished their presence too, as they had become like second parents to me. I especially enjoyed conversing with John about his life experiences. He had held a fascinating array of jobs, from ranch work to truck driving to auto body repair. He had even contributed to building the original World Trade Center, mastering construction, carpentry, drywall, and electrical work, despite his disabilities. Occasionally, John would recount stories from his time in Vietnam. Whenever he shared these rare glimpses into his wartime experiences, I was captivated, hanging on to his every word. To me, he was a genuine American hero. It deeply troubled me how Jenny disregarded her parents, knowing how much it hurt them. I attempted to discuss this with my ex-wife only to receive her usual response: "Mind your own business." I continued to keep up with Jenny and Brad on social media, a habit I had formed over time. The children enjoyed seeing photos of their mother in the newspaper too. Initially, after our separation, I closely monitored Jenny and Brad's marriage, expecting it to fall apart. However, over the years they appeared genuinely happy. Although I never directly inquired, Mark and Glenda mentioned that life at Brad's home was pleasant. The children grew fond of Brad, who seemed to treat them well, though he won them over partly by showering them with gifts, which children always appreciate. Sadly, Alma passed away from cancer about 8 years after our divorce. Her final days were spent at the ranch with us. The local funeral was well attended. The ranch, with its private cemetery dating back to the 1870s, became Alma's resting place at John's request. He also expressed a wish to be buried beside her, which we agreed to. I wasn't certain if Jenny would attend the funeral, as she had only spoken to her father once since her mother's death, when John called to inform her. Yet Jenny did arrive with Brad. She wore a dark blue dress and sunglasses. I was somewhat surprised by Brad's appearance. His hair was thinning and graying, and he had developed a slight potbelly. It seemed to me that his lifestyle involved too much travel, dining out, and too little exercise. John stood up to greet his daughter, and the moment was filled with awkward tension. They stood silently, staring at each other for what felt like an eternity, until John finally pulled his daughter into a hug. Jenny hesitated at first, but then slowly returned the embrace. Brad approached next, shaking John's hand and offering his condolences. Mark and Glenda, still tearful, went to comfort their mother with hugs. Brad then turned to me, nodding and smirking, seemingly hoping to unsettle me. Instead, I smiled back, extending my hand to shake his. When we attempted to sit in the front pew, it became clear there wasn't enough space. I suggested Brad and I move to the second pew, though Brad clearly wasn't pleased. John insisted I sit next to him, prompting Darla to take my place next to Brad in the second pew. During the service, I could hear Brad grumbling behind me, followed by Darla hissing something at him. Moments later, Brad abruptly left. After the service, John invited Jenny and Brad back to the ranch for the burial and a meal. Jenny declined, citing a flight she had to catch, an excuse I knew was false, though I kept silent about it. After the cemetery service, I caught Darla alone and asked her about what had happened between her and Brad during the church service. "He was upset because you were seated in the front row with his wife," Darla said, shaking her head. "But I sat on one side of John, and Jenny was on the other. We didn't sit together." I pointed that out to Mr. Coulson, and then told him to quiet down because the world doesn't revolve around him. Darla then grinned mischievously. I think he was offended. We chuckled about the incident, though we probably shouldn't have. Brad doesn't take kindly to those who don't show him proper respect. In other words, he's a vindictive jerk who truly believes he's above everyone else. 2 weeks later, Brad initiated another attempt to acquire land from Darla's ranch. This time, he asserted ownership over 10 acres of adjacent property. His legal team had discovered that these 10 acres had once been a separate parcel, which had never been properly integrated into the overall title of the ranch due to a clerical error. Consequently, taxes had never been assessed on this parcel. Brad's accountants calculated the owed taxes and promptly paid the county that sum. Subsequently, Brad's lawyers pursued a tax deed. Darla was dismayed by Brad's claim, despite the fact that these 10 acres consisted mostly of marshy and rocky terrain. She asked me whether she should simply sign over the land, considering its low value. Absolutely not, I responded immediately. This is Brad attempting to intimidate you and assert dominance because you offended him. Last time you couldn't afford to challenge him. It's time someone stood up to him and put a stop to this. His claim is baseless. As I anticipated, the court ruled in Darla's favor. They determined that the county's failure to collect taxes on the 10 acres was an administrative error. Moreover, the court stated that the county should have notified the current owner and provided an opportunity to settle the outstanding taxes before any action could be taken. To add to Darla's victory, the court limited the back taxes owed to a period of 5 years. After that, I didn't see Brad in person for a long time. Occasionally, I spotted him and Jenny in the society pages. During that period, my interactions with Jenny were rare. When I picked up the kids, often a staff member had them ready at the front door, which worked out fine. Meanwhile, Jenny increasingly missed her time with the kids as Brad traveled more. Over the years, I ended up having the kids about 9 months out of 12. They began to dread returning to their mother and Brad's home, complaining that Brad had become moody and their mother was often absent. Then, unexpectedly, Brad filed for divorce from Jenny, which shocked me. The kids were just as bewildered. However, as time passed, rumors surfaced that Brad had caught Jenny cheating with Tad Dumont, a billionaire. That explained everything. Jenny was trading up again. Tad was not only wealthier than Brad, but also considerably younger. Darla and I found the situation somewhat amusing. Soon after Brad and Jenny's divorce was finalized, Jenny married Tad. This turned out to be advantageous for me. Tad didn't reside in the Chesterton School District and wasn't keen on children. Therefore, practically speaking, Glenda and Mark lived with Darla and me full-time. After Alma passed away, I persuaded John to sell his house and move in with us. Since John was knowledgeable about construction, Darla hired him to handle repairs around the ranch. Darla and I then decided to expand the house to create a dining area for her ranch employees and to enlarge my accounting office. This led to another confrontation with Brad, who vehemently opposed our permit applications. Despite his efforts, we secured the permits due to our grandfathered status. John oversaw this new construction and personally completed about 85% of the work. A little over a year after Tad and Jenny got married, Jenny filed for divorce amid rumors that Tad was cheating with an 18-year-old girl. Later, another rumor surfaced that turned out to be true. Tad had only married Jenny to spite Brad and take his wife away from him. Talk about karma. Nowadays, every morning I wake up and give thanks to God for all the blessings He has given me. 10 to 30 years after D-Day passed by. As time went on, we experienced highs and lows, along with one devastating tragedy. Mark was in a serious car accident that could have been fatal. Fortunately, he escaped with a broken leg and wrist, along with various bruises and cuts. John suffered a mild stroke that left him partially paralyzed on his left side. Physical therapy greatly aided his recovery, and now he walks with only a slight limp. Darla seemed immune to illness, attributing it to her busy life, managing 4 kids and our ranch. I, on the other hand, was fortunate in a different way. After weeks of feeling unwell, low energy, headaches, and nausea, Darla finally insisted I see a doctor. Tests revealed a severely blocked artery, a ticking time bomb for a heart attack. Emergency triple bypass surgery saved me, and I immediately felt remarkably better after the operation. Glenda and Alma thankfully endured typical childhood illnesses. Sadly, Stevie passed away from cancer at just 7 years old. He faced his illness bravely, rarely complaining even when in pain. The night Stevie died, Darla and I held him close in his bed. "Mommy, Daddy, I'm glad you're here with me. Now I'm not scared," he whispered before peacefully passing away moments later. Darla was devastated and continues to struggle with antidepressants to this day. Our other children cried inconsolably for weeks, and for me it was the darkest day of my life, overshadowing even the pain of Jenny's betrayal. Darla and I wrestled with our grief for years. The hole in my heart only began to heal with the birth of my first grandchild. Glenda named her son Stephen Todd after her brother and her husband. All our children are now married, and we have 7 grandchildren. Each new grandchild brings a bit more healing to my heart, though a small ache remains whenever Stevie crosses my mind. We laid Stevie to rest beside his grandmother. Nearly 300 people attended the service, but Jenny was absent, off somewhere in Europe, South America, or beyond with her latest boyfriend. Frankly, I didn't care where she was, and was secretly relieved she hadn't shown up. I was too emotionally fragile to face her. The 6 months following Stevie's death were excruciatingly hard. Some nights I'd wake to find Darla missing, knowing she had gone to Stevie's grave. I'd grab a blanket and join her there, lying down beside my wife, wrapping us both in warmth. Even years later, I'd find solace sitting by Stevie's grave, talking to him. As for Jenny, if you're wondering whether I ever entertained the thought of rekindling things after she became single, the answer is a resounding no. That idea never crossed my mind until Darla brought it up one evening while we watched TV. Casually, she asked, "Have you ever thought about getting back together with Jenny?" Despite her attempt to make it seem insignificant, I saw the fear in her eyes. Without a word, I stood, pulled her up and kissed her passionately, then led her to the bedroom. We didn't waste much time undressing each other. 2 hours later, I asked Darla, "What did you ask me?" "Never mind," she replied, snuggling close. "One day I noticed an elderly gentleman seated in my waiting area, prompting me to approach and offer assistance. When he raised his head, I was taken aback. It was Brad. "Well, Brad, this is unexpected," I said, extending my hand. Brad clasped my hand weakly and replied, "You won?" "Pardon?" I asked, puzzled. "I loved her deeply," Brad continued sadly, "and I believed she loved me too." It suddenly dawned on me that he was referring to Jenny. Yes, Jenny has a way of captivating hearts. But she has a flaw. She was born into poverty and could never quite overcome it. To her, wealth meant happiness. "I now understand your pain when Jenny left," Brad confessed. "How did you manage to move forward?" "Day by day, with the support of a caring woman," I answered honestly. "There's no easy remedy." Brad sighed heavily. "It's too late for me to find another. I loved Jenny with all my heart, but that's not why I'm here. I have stage 4 cancer, and I needed to apologize to you. Pursuing a married woman was wrong, but I couldn't help falling for Jenny. I hope someday you can forgive me." Looking at the elderly man before me, I was struck by the realization that I had once harbored intense hatred toward him. Now, however, I only felt pity. "Brad, there was a time I despised you," I confessed. "But that's long in the past. If you seek my forgiveness, you have it." He smiled sadly, expressed gratitude, and departed. 5 months later, he passed away. Darla and I attended his funeral, surprised by the sparse attendance. Among those present was Jenny, visibly distraught over Brad's death and particularly incensed with me. "You just had to show up and rub it in, didn't you?" Jenny accused bitterly. "You couldn't let me bury him in peace. You wanted everyone to see that you were the winner." I was furious. "You're a hypocrite. You left him for someone wealthier and now you shed fake tears because he's gone. Brad apologized to me months ago and I forgave him. Did you ever apologize to Brad for how you treated him?" I didn't wait for a response. I took Darla's arm and we departed. The drive home remained silent for quite some time. Then, out of nowhere, Darla turned to me and quipped, "Who ruined your morning mood?" I couldn't help it. I burst into laughter. Darla always had a knack for making me smile. When Brad's will was revealed, it caught me off guard. Sure, he left most of his estate to charity and his old university. Yet he also bequeathed $2 million to Jenny. With windfalls from 2 wealthy husbands and this latest inheritance, Jenny was financially secure. She bought a condo near the ranch, attempting to reconnect with her children. However, they weren't keen on visiting. They complained that the condo, designed for middle-aged singles, had nothing for them to do. I encouraged them to give their mother a chance. But the divide was too wide. Jenny eventually gave up and found a new boyfriend. From then on, Jenny went through boyfriends like people change socks. The kids were content not visiting their mother's place. As long as they were happy, so was I. I was incredibly proud of our children. Mark graduated from Georgia Tech with a degree in engineering and now resides in Austin, where he works. He recently married Cindy Stubbins, a wonderful girl from Ohio whom he met at GT. She's also an engineer, and they both work at the same company. They have 2 lovely young daughters, and Cindy works remotely from home. Glenda pursued her dream of becoming a veterinarian at Texas A&M. After graduation, she returned home and worked under local vet Sam Turner for a few years before starting her own practice. Shortly after, Todd Amberson, a young veterinarian, bought out Sam's practice. It seemed inevitable that Glenda and Todd would merge both their practices and lives through marriage. They now have 2 sons and a daughter, and our grandkids practically live on their ranch, where they spend a lot of time with Jenny's father, who they adore as much as we do. My daughter Alma graduated from the University of Texas with a teaching degree and now teaches 3rd grade at Chesterton Elementary. She married Jerry, her college sweetheart, who teaches chemistry at Marion High School. They're expecting their first child in about 3 months, which makes me ecstatic. I adore grandkids. They're even better than your own children. Just kidding, but grandkids do have their perks. You can spoil them as much as you want and then happily hand them back when they get fussy. Mark married a wonderful woman he met while vacationing in England. No, she's not British. She's American like us. Her name is Sally, a petite woman with long dark hair and violet eyes. I playfully call her a mini Elizabeth Taylor. They have 3 children, 2 boys and a girl, and we just found out she's pregnant with their 4th. It's incredible how well Sally handles childbirth despite her small stature. Time flew by, and Darla and I recently celebrated our 30th wedding anniversary. Unfortunately, I haven't seen much of Jenny lately. The kids keep in touch with her occasionally, but they rarely visit. According to them, time has caught up with Jenny, as it does with all of us. She's no longer the catch she once was and hasn't dated anyone in a couple of years. Jenny used to call her father about once every 2 months. He was almost 90 but still active and mentally sharp. Their conversations were short and always left her father feeling a bit down. When I once asked him why he didn't talk to Jenny longer, he admitted he didn't know what to say to her. That saddened me for his sake. As Christmas approached again, I went to the mall for shopping. Admitting my terrible gift-picking skills long ago, I simply learned which stores my family liked and bought gift cards there. It might sound uninspired, but it ensured I never chose the wrong item, size, or color. So far, no one had complained. After buying my last card, I felt hungry and headed to the food court for a Chick-fil-A sandwich and lemonade. Just as I was about to take my first bite, I noticed a familiar face at a nearby table. It was Jenny. She sat alone, observing the bustling mall crowd, particularly the families. Jenny had changed since we were married. She had gained some weight and developed wrinkles and age spots on her hands. Despite this, she remained attractive for her age. However, it was the loneliness in her eyes that struck me the most. I made up my mind to overcome any awkwardness and went over to sit with her. "Hey, mind if I join you?" I asked, placing my sandwich and drink on the table. "What do you want?" Jenny snapped back. I was taken aback by her hostility. It took a moment to register, then I picked up my sandwich and drink. "I don't want anything. I just wanted to say hi. Sorry to bother you. I'm not looking for trouble, so I'll find another table." Jenny's expression softened momentarily, a flicker of pain crossing her face. "No, I'm sorry. Holidays tend to bring out the worst in me. Please sit. I'd like the company." "What brings you to the mall? Christmas shopping?" I inquired, taking a bite of my chicken sandwich. "Mike, I haven't done Christmas shopping since Brad and I split. I just send checks now. The kids must appreciate them, especially the grandkids' ones. They probably put that money straight into college funds." "I know," Jenny replied, watching a young couple with a baby stroller pass by. "They tell me in their thank you notes. So why the mall today? You were never one for shopping. If you needed something, you'd just go to the store and be done with it." "I just wanted to be around people," Jenny said absent-mindedly, eyeing another family trying to corral 3 kids. "Everyone in my building has scattered for the holidays." "So what are your Christmas plans? You're not going to spend it alone in your condo, are you?" "Definitely not," Jenny replied firmly. "I've booked a table at Chez Francesca, and then I'm catching the new Tom Hanks movie." "Nah, that's not happening," I interjected, polishing off my sandwich. "You're coming to the ranch for Christmas. The kids, grandkids, and your dad will all be there. It'll be a blast." "I couldn't impose like that," Jenny protested. "I'd just make everyone uncomfortable." "Nonsense," I insisted, tossing my trash away. "Consider it settled. You're coming." I glanced back as I left. "If you want to see the grandkids open their presents, get there by 7 a.m. But come whenever. Dinner's at 3. Darla wasn't thrilled when I mentioned Jenny might join us for Christmas. "Why invite her?" Darla asked, a hint of jealousy in her eyes. I pulled Darla close, teasingly. "Is my wife jealous?" "Stop it, Mike, I'm serious." Darla's eyes flashed. "She'll just make things awkward." "That's what Jenny thought too," I explained. "But I couldn't leave her alone in her condo." "What about Jenny?" John walked in, curious. "I asked her to spend Christmas with us," I told John like a son. "Did she agree?" John's eyes sparked and Darla noticed. "Not exactly," I admitted. "She's worried about being a burden, but I won't take no for an answer. Whether she comes is up to her." John's joy wavered, but hope glinted in his eyes. On Christmas Day, Jenny didn't appear to watch the grandkids unwrap their gifts or join us for the 3 o'clock dinner. By then, it seemed clear she wouldn't make it, and John seemed to think the same. He looked dejected and sat alone. Feeling sorry for him, I finally sent my youngest grandchild, Christy, who was 4, to fetch him to play her game. As expected, he soon joined her on the floor for a game of Candyland. Around 5:30, I heard the doorbell ring, surprising me. Opening the door, I found Jenny dressed as if she were heading out to dinner. "Hey," I greeted her warmly. "I was starting to think you weren't coming." "I'm still not sure this is right," she said, uncertainty in her eyes. "No, it's fine," I reassured her. "You missed dinner, but we're about to have dessert soon. If you're hungry, I can warm up some leftovers for you." "No, dessert sounds perfect," Jenny replied as I ushered her inside. "Hey, everyone," I called out to the family in the living room. "Look who's here. Jenny's come for dessert." The grandchildren swarmed around her enthusiastically. They had been choosing teams for a game and all wanted Jenny on their side. Mark and Glenda approached, embracing and kissing their mother, exchanging Merry Christmas wishes. Surprisingly, even Darla hugged and kissed Jenny. The evening progressed pleasantly. Initially nervous, Jenny seemed to carefully consider everything said to her. Gradually, as she realized she was the only one feeling uneasy, she began to relax. It was heartwarming to witness Jenny and her father sitting together, chatting and laughing. Overall, it was a satisfying Christmas. Although Jenny had eased from her initial tension upon arrival, it was evident she still harbored uncertainty about being at Darla and my home. I couldn't help but observe Jenny at times. She remained an attractive woman, yet my feelings towards her were purely that of the mother of my children. After putting the grandchildren to bed, their parents decided to use the hot tub despite the freezing temperature outside. This held no appeal for Darla, Jenny, or myself. John attempted it briefly but soon returned, declaring it madness to sit in a tub in such cold weather, even if heated. Instead, I fetched drinks for everyone, and we gathered around the fireplace with the Christmas tree softly glowing beside us. We sat quietly for 15 minutes, observing the flames flickering around the logs. At some point, I noticed tears rolling down Jenny's cheeks. "Are you okay?" I asked, puzzled by her tears. "I'll be fine," Jenny replied softly, wiping them away. Neither Darla nor I mentioned the tears, letting the silence envelop us once more. After another 5 minutes, Jenny started speaking. "I almost didn't come," Jenny began, her gaze fixed on the fire. "I was afraid of confirming what I already knew. I've made a mess of my life." "You're being too hard on yourself," Darla unexpectedly interjected. "I've seen photos of you and Brad. It was obvious you loved him. And the same with Tad. Marriages can fall apart, half do statistically. I did love Brad at first, even though I still loved you, Mike. But I was drawn to his money and power. We were good for a long time, but I let him distance me from my kids. With him being so much older, health issues arose. His frustration affected us. I started seeing someone else months before Tad. Brad's pain mirrored yours, Mike. With Tad, I suspected he was unfaithful from the start. When I caught him, he didn't care. He married me out of spite for Brad over some business. It hit me hard like it did for you and Brad. After Tad, I thought, to hell with marriage. I indulged myself, had affairs, put my desires first. I was selfish, neglecting my kids. I'm amazed they don't hate me." That was about as close to an apology as Jenny could give. After another few minutes of silence, Jenny drained her glass and stood. "I have to go." Darla, John, and I tried to convince Jenny to spend the night, but she refused, so John and I walked her out to her car. Her father hugged her tight and told her he loved her. That started Jenny's tears again. She wiped them away, and just before Jenny got in, she pulled me into a tight hug and said, "Thank you." Then Jenny was gone. I don't know what the years ahead will hold. I do believe that Jenny sincerely regrets many of the choices she's made in her life. Whether she will choose to reconnect with her family is her choice. The house is quiet now, except for the occasional pop or crackle from the fireplace. I couldn't help but think about how sad my ex-wife was, and yes, I did feel sorry for her. As for me, I wanted to kick myself for all the time I wasted trying to find some way to get revenge against Jenny and Brad. As I sat watching the fire dance, I thought again of the Bible verse. "The race is not to the swift or the battle to the strong, nor does food come to the wise or wealth to the brilliant or favor to the learned, but time and chance happen to them all." As it turned out, time was the ultimate revenge,